It can manifest itself.
We're doing the same for the rest of America. Mutual of You're watching Now with Bill Moyers. Funding for Now has been provided by Mutual of America, our sole corporate funder. For over 50 years, we've put retirement and pension products to work for those in the public service. Now we're doing the same for the rest of America. Mutual of America, for all of America, the spirit of America. And by the Kohlberg Foundation, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and by contributions to your PBS stations from viewers like you. Thank you. From our studios in New York, Bill Moyers.
With us now is Imam Zaid Shakir. He lives in New Haven, Connecticut, where he's the spiritual leader of his mosque and where Yale University lists him as a spiritual resource for students. He travels widely and has become a national and forceful voice for the Islamic faith in this country. Listen to what he said to the Islamic Society of North America a couple of years ago.
One of the miraculous things associated with Islam is that this civilizational genus in Islam, it can manifest itself anywhere. And we can make this Islam manifest itself right here in the United States of America, so that when people look back in history, they can talk about the Islamic civilization of America.
Wow. You recognize that man?
Yeah, I do.
You were born in Berkeley, California, grew up in Michigan.
It was a very good year.
What led you to accept Islam as your faith?
Well, I grew up, as you mentioned, in Georgia, Atlanta, and Connecticut. We were in public housing projects, and growing up in those environments, there are a lot of good things, a lot of wholesome things, but you see a lot of negative things. And as I matured towards the end of high school, 12th grade specifically, I began to think about how we could possibly change these things. And as I began to study religion, I was a Baptist, so I studied Christianity. I studied Eastern religions, and I was a communist for a brief period of time, and I felt that a communist revolution would bring about change. But I eventually was led back to belief in God, and that rediscovery of God led me to examine religion more closely, and that examination culminated with my becoming a Muslim.
What was it about Islam that in particular said, this is the way I want to go?
I think it was the structured nature of worship in Islam. Islam has a set of moral teachings, Islam has an ethical code, but it also has a day-to-day program for living your life from sun up to sundown in terms of prayers, in terms of certain devotions. And a person who's looking for religion, this is the first way that usually religion impresses itself on a person. What do I actually do in my day-to-day life to live like the prophets? And I found that Islam had a program for the individual at a personal level. It had a program for the family. It had a program for the community. It had a program for society at large, and a program for the world. So it was the comprehensiveness of Islam that really attracted me.
When you heard that the terrorists on 9/11 did their violence in the name of Allah, did you feel betrayed?
I didn't feel betrayed because I don't think that anyone who understands Islam could do such a thing in the name of Allah. Islam doesn't encourage nor endorse indiscriminate, insane murder. So in that sense, I felt shocked, like all Americans, and I felt that really we have to reassess, a lot of us as Muslims, myself, I'm speaking personally, really what Islam means and what we have to offer the world and what is the best way to present that to the world. This sort of action is not the best way. It's not a way, period.
But the people who did it did appeal to Islam, did appeal to Allah, did say they were acting in the name of Islam.
If these people claim to be Muslim, I think that they were confused in their understanding of Islam, if indeed they were Muslim, not in terms of the person themselves, but if their personal faith was indeed rooted in Islam, that they were confused. And I think the biographical sketches of some of these individuals indicate or are indicative of confused individuals. We have suicide bombers who are hanging out in discos, allegedly in bars, arguing in bars, etc. This isn't this type of behavior that even the typical suicide bomber exemplifies. So I think this is indicative of a confused individual. So if these sketches are sort of illustrative of the group at large, I think there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding working into the whole situation.
Have you ever felt any divided loyalties between your faith in Allah and your values as an American?
No, I think that I definitely have gone through a phase of very strong anti-American sentiment, but I think it was more dissent as opposed to a desire to bring harm to anyone or encourage harming anyone. There's no divided loyalty because a lot of the core values of Islam are very much compatible with the core values that this country was founded on, and the values which continue, even if at a philosophical or idealistic level, to inform what it means to be an American. If you look at, for example, Ben Franklin's 13 virtues, all of these, patience, abstinence, frugality, etc., all of these are totally consistent and compatible with the core virtues of Islam. Hard work. A lot of Muslims have done so well in this story because as Muslims, we very much believe in the Horatio Alger success story. Work hard, save your money, be decent, and you'll get ahead. So Islam encourages this, and I think this is one reason so many Muslims have done well in this country. So there's no contradiction.
Do you resent that question?
No, not at all.
You understand why people are asking
It's a valid question. I mean, what's happened, a lot of things that have happened in the aftermath, they're valid. Searches at the airport are valid. When I go to the airport and only my shoes are being checked, that's a valid thing. I can't object to that, and I have to understand it. If I failed to understand it, I think I would be quite ignorant.
It used to be in New York, if a young black man got on the subway, he was looked at with fear. This is a dangerous person. Now I can see that it's the Pakistani vendor at the newsstand, it's the Indian taxi driver. It's your turn.
Yeah, I think to a point, but also a lot of people, I think, can see beyond what's presented in the media and understand that you have to judge people pretty much as individuals. And I think that attitude has expressed itself in the tremendous goodwill that we as Muslims have received from the overwhelming segment of the American population in the aftermath of this tremendous crisis.
You do understand that people are scared because the terrorists use their religion as a call to martyrdom. And people are saying, how do I know that the young man down the street, the young men down the street, the people in your mosque wouldn't do the same thing if called several years from now to repeat that terrorism? You understand that?
I can understand it to a point, but I think that human beings are more complex than that. That indeed, in any religious faith, you have extremists, you have fanatics, you have people that are outright nuts. And as Muslims, we haven't cornered the market on these categories of human beings. I think the fact that Islam is largely unknown sort of creates a bit of apprehension. But I think as people learn more about Islam and step back and realize that that Muslim down the street is my cousin, is my co-worker, and I've worked with this person for years, I've known this person all my life, and I know this person has never been involved in anything too extreme, except maybe the name change or the dress styles, etc., that people can eventually come to accept Muslims like they accept all other Americans at face value. And then when something does happen, which is extremely radical or extremely violent, etc., people can look at those individuals as sick individuals or misguided individuals, as they do extremists or terrorists who come from any other faith tradition.
I doubt that after Timothy McVeigh blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City, many people looked at my two strapping white sons and said they're terrorists. Do you feel that there's a special discrimination, a smear campaign going on against young Muslims?
I wouldn't say a smear campaign, but I think there are people and elements who are trying, and they don't represent the majority of the American people, but I think there are elements out there that are trying to exploit what has happened and the nature of the events to discredit Islam and to possibly denigrate the Muslim community, or at least elements within the Muslim community.
What do you say, Imam, to people who do fear that extremists are hiding in plain sight?
I would say that look at history. We've been in this country as Muslims even before the country. And during the slavery period, in some areas of this country, upwards to 50% of the slave population was Muslim off the coast of Carolina. In the Mississippi Delta area, upwards to 30% of the slaves were Muslims. A random African American who chooses to trace his roots, Alex Haley, ends up in a Muslim village in West Africa. So Muslims have been here in this country. Even after slavery, Muslims were here. The life of a very prominent European American, Caucasian American, Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb, in the late 19th century. A very prominent individual, was a committed Muslim and did wonderful things propagating Islam. So Muslims have been here for a long time, and we haven't been involved in the sort of thing that happened September 11th. So Muslims have been in this country. We haven't been involved in this sort of things, despite the fact that indeed some of us, I put myself on the list, at times have been involved in very provocative rhetoric. Some of us have voiced a very strong dissent to the foreign policy of this country, but despite that, we have not been involved in acts of terrorism. So that history, I think, can give us an indication of what we can expect in the future, and the fact that these individuals allegedly came from outside of this country.
One new development, and I'm quoting here Mohammed Isham Kabani, who is a member of the Islamic Supreme Council of America. It's a small group, I understand that. He's been quoted as saying that extremists have taken over 80% of the mosques in the United States. Is that true?
I would say it's definitely not true. And I think this is a very subjective statement.
Do you see evidence that mosques are being taken over by radical elements?
Not at all.
Have there been any radical elements in your mosque in New Haven?
Not that I know of. And again, what do you mean by radical?
Well, he says extremist. I don't know what he means.
Extremist. I think we would have to ask him. Because, I mean, this is a very evocative term, extremist, because of the way Muslims have been treated by some members of the press. When we say extremist, we're possibly talking about people who slam airplanes into the side of buildings. So if that's what we mean by extremists, definitely mosques have not been taken over by extremists. If we mean people that occasionally make very strong statements about establishing Islam in America, if that's an extremist, then we're looking at a different phenomenon.
Well, what do you mean? We saw you a moment ago saying that you want to build an Islamic civilization in America. Does that mean building an Islamic state?
No, that means bringing the higher principles. When we're talking about civilization, we're talking about the higher aspects of human society, learning, education, culture. So these higher aspects of human society that have been informed by Islam, when Islam was strong and viable and was the architect of a viable civilization, introducing those elements of Islam into American society for the betterment of this society and the uplift of this society. Because as a Muslim, honestly, and this is subjective, and it's as I see it based on my limited realm of experience, there are a lot of things going wrong here. There are a lot of things that are right and a lot of things that are good and healthy, but there are also some things that are going wrong. And I think that the best aspects of Islam can address some of those issues.
The Prophet Muhammad did say of Allah, quote, "It is he who has sent his messenger with guidance and the religion of truth, that it may triumph over all other religions." How do you interpret that?
I interpret that as meaning that the progression of man's spiritual progression culminates. As a Muslim, we believe all of our religious experiences were Islam. Islam simply means to submit to the will of God. So people who accepted the will of God as articulated by Moses were Muslims. As articulated by Jesus were Muslims. As articulated by Muhammad were Muslims. So as Muhammad is the last, this is the last word on the subject, but it's very consistent with what came before. So it's the culmination of our spiritual trajectory, if you will.
You say in one of your essays, quote, "Allah tells us in unambiguous terms, fight them on until there is no more." Now, before you answer that, let me say I grew up singing "Onward, Christian Soldiers," marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the Royal Master leads against the foe, forward into battle, see his banner go. I mean, that's a pretty militant hymn.
Right.
So you say, fight them on until there's no more. Is that just a metaphor?
This is a general instruction for those people or groups of people, particularly in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He was told, I've been sent to fight the people until they testify that there's no God but Allah, Muhammad is the messenger. But we are told and taught as Muslims that that was specific to the people of the Arabian Peninsula, that particular command. And so this statement came from an essay in which a lot of things were said, but the main point was that in the context of Muslims being involved in the political system here in this country, that we have to look at a full range of political options. And one of those is not guerrilla war, as some people have tried to make out from this essay, but that civil involvement at different levels. What's the best thing for us right now? Is it best to get involved fully in the political system before we really have put together a serious political agenda?
You say in that same essay that Islam presents an absolutist political agenda, one which doesn't lend itself to compromise nor to coalition building.
Right.
Are you saying that Islam cannot be a part of democracy, but must stand apart from democracy?
I said that 10 years ago. That essay was written over 10 years ago.
Would you say it now?
I would not say it now.
You would say that Islam is compatible with coalition building, with compromise, with democracy?
No, but I would say Islam is compatible with working together with decent people at various social, political, and cultural levels to make the world a better place. So,
and yet you're also right that Allah declares that it is a disease of the heart. And I know people can change. I've changed a lot of things I used to believe, but this is on the record. Allah declares that it is a disease of the heart which pushes one to seek the support of non-believers. That there's something really radically wrong if you try to cooperate with Jews, Christians.
No. This is in the area of strategic affairs, and this statement is based on a very narrow interpretation of Islam, which I had at that time because I had informally studied the religion. And this is one of the reasons I dropped everything in 1994 and spent 7 years of my life. I've just returned to this country 3 months ago to study the religion in its fullness. So as I was mentioning to earlier, before this interview, a lot of times a person comes into Islam, like myself, with a lot of baggage. And we, or I, but we, generally speaking, understand Islam based on that first initial presentation. And if we never get beyond that, we can become stagnant.
That's what I like about democracy. It says leave the baggage at the door.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter to me whether you believe in 20 gods or no God. What matters to me is whether you believe in democracy.
But the point is, but there's a lot more to Islam than a highly politicized version or a highly literalist version that looks at certain texts and don't understand them with the full equipment of the Islamic law. Islamic laws, we can basically say, articulates itself at three levels: the level of rulings, the level of foundational principles, and the level of higher objectives. Now, what we're getting today and what that statement and the entire essay is indicative of, the level of rulings that are not understood on the basis of foundational legal principles, nor at the level of higher objectives. So, looking at the whole picture, a lot of those statements I wouldn't make.
All right, let me just do one more that I found in one of your essays. Let me put this on the screen so our viewers can see it. Quote, Muslims cannot accept the legitimacy of the American secular system, which is against the orders and ordainments of Allah. The orientation of the Quran pushes us in the exact opposite direction. I'd like to know, a serious question, what is it that Allah might find illegitimate about America?
I think that as a Muslim, I would say it might not lead to a negative consequence, but the ability ultimately to enact strictures and legislation that might be inconsistent with what we have generally
with Islamic law
as general religious law would be objectionable. But having said that, that does not mean that as a Muslim I am not obligated to work for the betterment of this country and the betterment of the world and the citizens of this country. I am, and I'm bound by that same Islamic law to not do anything to work against the public safety and well-being of this country or its citizens. I have implicitly entered into a covenant of protection, and part of that covenant dictates that I remain here in a law-abiding fashion.
To be moral, does a government have to be religious?
Not necessarily. And I think I said it could possibly lead to a situation. So it doesn't have to be religious. But I think if governments are truly informed by religious principles, that they would ultimately be moral. Which doesn't mean that every government claiming to be religious is moral.
If you had your way, would students be permitted to recite the Basmalah in class in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate?
I don't understand the question.
I mean, if you could write the law,
if I could write the law, it would be pretty much what it is, in the sense that everyone is free to say whatever they want. I would say there's a moment of silence, and whatever you choose to say, you should say. And that's consistent with how Islam deals with other faiths.
Tell me something about what you've gone through since September 11th as an American and as a Muslim.
I think that there's been a lot of introspection in terms of coming to grips with ultimately what Islam stands for and what we as Muslims have to offer this country and the world at large. And as a person growing up in this country, I've experienced a lot of the pain and frustration that people feel, in the sense that a terrible wrong has been done. But that wrong has been used by various people in many different ways, and sometimes it comes out very negatively in terms of how Muslims have been perceived.
You
as a result of all of this.
you
So it's doubly painful, ultimately. As an American, you feel the pain of the innocent people being lost by the senseless acts that were perpetrated. And as a Muslim, you feel the pain not only knowing a lot of those people killed there were Muslims, but that now your religion is put in a position where really you have to explain yourself, where you haven't done anything as an individual, nor as a community. American Muslims haven't been involved in this sort of thing in the past, nor in this terrible situation which took place.
You studied several years in Syria, studied Islamic science, studied a number of subjects. What did you learn there about why so many Muslims see America as the enemy?
Become angered by things that this country does periodically in the Middle East.
Such as?
Fair peace, but in the final analysis, the bombs and the napalm and the tanks and jets and planes generally have "Made in America" on them. Do you destroy the military infrastructure of the country, but the sewage treatment plants? So now the sewage is going into the river.
You mean in Israel? In
Iraq.
In Iraq.
Not allowing
Iraq, right.
hoof and mouth disease. We know what we went through in this country to keep it out. It's rampant in Iraq. They can't even vaccinate their cattle because the UN destroyed the factory that makes the vaccination in 1993.
So they see it mostly as American foreign policy.
It's aspects of American foreign policy, most definitely.
What is your, and we're almost...
But again, it's anger and not a deep-rooted, permanent rage.
So there's nothing in Islam that says America is the enemy. It's in politics.
It's political primarily. And an indication of that, just see how long the lines are outside of the American embassy in any Middle Eastern country. So if people hated the country so much, there wouldn't be such a fervor to come here. And most of the people standing in lines have on blue jeans and I Heart America t-shirts. So I think it's a severe exaggeration to say Muslims hate America and they're out to get us. They resent our way of life.
Some do.
Some do, but they're a small minority. You can find a minority in any religion that hate a lot of things.
So what?
But to extrapolate from the sentiments of that minority and to taint an entire class or group of people, I think that's not accurate, nor is it proper.
So what is your interpretation as a student of the Quran of a jihad?
Jihad is two levels. One is a general struggle to improve oneself, improve society, and one is a struggle against forces that are antagonistic to Islam and the Muslim community, but in accordance to very well-defined rules. And those rules aren't honored by people who slam jet planes into into buildings, if that's where this question is leading to. So there's no way the Islamic concept or idea of jihad supports the kind of actions that were undertaken September 11th, allegedly in the name of Islam.
I appreciate very much your coming here and dealing with these questions, and I wish you well.
I wish you well, and I thank you for this opportunity.